So far, we've stripped my van's interior down to an empty shell, and created the steel framing that's going to be the basis for my cabinets and storage system. Now I'm going to walk you through the rest of the build process until we have a finished camper van. The first thing I'm starting out with is some kill mat. This is a sound deadening material that helps reduce noise from vibrations. The wheel wells are one of the noisiest parts of the vehicle, so I'm putting 2 layers of kill mat on those, and I'm also putting some on the sides of all the body panels and in between the ridges on the floor. With the sound deadening in place, I can get started on cutting and fitting the insulation boards for the walls. If I had to do it over again, I'd spend a little bit more money on the Polyiso foam boards rather than this XPS, or basically styrofoam foam boards. You get a little bit better R value, and it doesn't make it nearly as bad of a mess. Basically, this whole process was cutting apart little chunks of foam, wedging them in place, then sealing all the edges with foil tape. With the walls now insulated and the cabinet frame reinstalled, I can start measuring and planning out my floor. The foundation of the floor is starting with these furring strips. I'm placing them in every other one of the grooves in the floor, and then gluing them down with construction adhesive. In between each of the furring strips, I'm putting a 1/2-inch piece of Polyiso foam board to insulate the floor. This will be much better than the sheet of Reflectix that was sandwiched between the body metal and a piece of plywood before. With the insulation laid down, I can start cutting the plywood to lay over the top. Now this plywood is pretty thin. Most people would probably want to go thicker. However, I wanted to save weight, and I was also constrained by the height of my fridge and it being able to roll underneath my countertops. With the plywood fastened down, I picked up some peel and stick vinyl plank flooring and started laying it over the top. And that's the floor finished. And since the area under the cabinets isn't going to be seen or visible, it's just going to get a sheet of insulation board. As far as the electrics go, the setup is virtually the same as my last tour. The only difference is I've upgraded to a lithium-ion battery, and I've added a fuse block so that I don't have a bunch of wires running to the battery post. If you are interested in a full electrical system tour, let me know in the comments down below and I'll make a separate video. I'm now confident that I won't need to make any more modifications to the frame, so I pull it out and give it a coat of white paint. My absolute favorite spray paint to use is Rust-Oleum Appliance Epoxy. To cover the upper portion of the walls, I'm going to be using this really thin plastic wall paneling. It's nice and flexible, and I think it'll work pretty well for wrapping around the back corner of the van, a spot that's usually pretty tricky. To start with, I'm going to cut it in half, and then offer it up to the van and start marking with the Sharpie and trimming to make it fit. In the process of putting up the wall panel, I decided it would be easier to just cover up the rear quarter glass. It doesn't provide much in the way of visibility when I'm driving, and it makes for a cleaner look inside and more privacy. To finish the tops and bottoms of the wall panels, I'm going to be using some tongue and groove blue pine. And the piece on the passenger side is where I'm going to mount the dome light. For the cabinet walls, I'm using a pretty thin sheet of sanded plywood. This plywood doesn't need to be very thick because all the strength in the cabinets is coming from the steel frame, so the only job this plywood's doing is keeping things from falling out. So I start by ripping this board in half, and then cutting each panel to size, then fitting them into the framing and gluing them in place with construction adhesive. Before I completely finish the cabinet walls, I need to start working on the countertops and my parcel shelf. The base of my parcel shelf is going to be made out of some CDX plywood, and I'm going to wrap it in some cheap recycled plastic carpeting. I was pretty happy with the way that turned out, so I decided to wrap the adjoining countertops in carpet as well. Rather than using hinges on the countertops to access the storage, I'm screwing some really strong magnets to the bottom of the countertop so it can snap on and off from the steel frame. Oh, yeah, that's not going to move anywhere, but I can lift it up. Oh, this was an awesome idea. This was a really good idea. Dang. Now moving on, I need to get focused on finishing my full height cabinet, which means I need to finish the side walls for the upper part and then build some cabinet doors. Now I'm going to try my hand at building some cabinet doors. I'd say that's not too bad a result for someone who's not a carpenter. Getting them to sit straight isn't really easy, and I didn't quite succeed, but it's good enough for me. The only problem is, now these white cabinet faces make the rest of the walls on the cabinets look really unfinished, so they're going to get a coat of white too. I decided that this spot on the left side of my full height cabinet is going to be where I store my phone and other electronics, so I'm going to install 2 USB ports into the wall. I also need to install the dimmer switch for my LED accent lights. Look at that. Stuck right on there. To build my kitchen countertop, I'm using this edge-glued piece of pine that I picked up for about 18 bucks at Lowe's. And I'm going to stain it with some Minwax poly shades. This process took about 3 days of staining and waiting and staining and waiting, but it's finally ready to install, so I'm going to drill some holes in my frame, then screw the countertop up from the bottom. I kept my kitchen storage area pretty simple. I built another cabinet door, then put a couple milk crates in there to store things like my food and gas cans, and my stove fits right next to them. Well, there it is, from rough sketches on my computer to a finished result. Now we just gotta get out there and test it in the real world. If you like to follow along with the rest of our adventures, make sure to subscribe, and to make sure you don't miss out on any other videos, click the notification bell as well.